Hi folks, it's Darcy from the Purposeful and welcome back to another edition of Drycember, where we're taking a bite-sized chunk out of learning to dehydrate all month long. And before we get started on today's edition, which is all about powders, I wanted to remind you of two things. One, the Dehydrating Basics book. Here's the photo right here. The ebook that goes along with this series, if you would like to have something in a format that you can read other than being on YouTube, is available in my store for $3 through January 1st. On January 1st, it turns back to $4, but it's available in the link down below on my website. And then tomorrow night at 5 p.m. U.S. Central Time, we have a live chat for our last night of Drycember, where we're going to be talking a little bit about this and that, and a lot about how to use your dehydrated products in the foods that you cook every day. So let's get started on today's powders, shall we? I can put a particular dehydrated powder into just about everything we do. I put spinach and kale and collard greens in my brownies. I put broccoli and carrots and peas in my pancakes. We do powders in everything that we make, okay? Because powders are great. And here's a couple of reasons why. You can add extra nutrients to anything that you're eating, especially if you're wanting to boost something like pancakes. You can add vegetable powder into your pancake mix. It's relatively tasteless as long as you're not putting way too much in there, and it adds some extra nutrients into a meal that typically can be void of many nutrients depending on how you make your pancakes. I put green powder in everything, including brownies, because you can't see it, and it just adds a little bit of nutrients, so it makes me feel a little less guilty about eating a brownie. Another reason is that for people who have texture issues, you may have kids who are pretty particular about the kind of foods they eat. We have one of those who we call the super taster, who he is very averse to certain textures, and it makes eating foods for him kind of difficult. Doing powders allows me to put a lot of vegetables into his foods that he wouldn't eat as a vegetable, but he'll gladly eat it when the powders are there. Another texture issue for our family is mushrooms, because that son and myself both don't like the taste of rehydrated mushrooms in our meals. We will powder mushroom just like this. It looks just like this. And I can add this to anything, and we still get that deep, rich flavor of mushroom, but we're not eating those mushrooms themselves. And then the last reason, or at least a third reason, there are probably a lot of other reasons, but another one that makes sense for me is that you can rehydrate food and find that you just don't like the result of it. But instead of wasting it by throwing it away, powder it and add it to either a generic vegetable powder or a generic green powder. Both of these are my staples in my house. We go through these like crazy. I will go through this entire jar about once every 2 to 3 months. A jar like this, about the same. I don't use these as extensively as I do the green powder because we don't eat a lot of cooked greens, and so I use this a lot to help boost that kind of nutrition. In case you're thinking about it, what's in these are ever evolving. If it's green, it goes in this powder. If it's a vegetable, it goes in this powder. So I bulk this and I make it fast by doing frozen vegetables and dehydrating them and powdering them and put them in this jar. And then for greens, it's whatever greens I happen to grow in the yard or whatever I'm buying from the store. They get dehydrated and then ground and put in this jar, so that this will never be there's not a recipe for it. It's just whatever greens happen to be in stock for me, I will grind them in this. And then fruit powders become a great way to add flavor to anything that you're making. Like I use it a lot. This is my raspberry powder, and I use it a lot to flavor. They can be used to flavor icings for cakes. They can be used to flavor cakes. They can be used to flavor any kind of muffins that you're making. Fruit powders can be used to rim the edge of a cocktail glass. You can do all sorts of things. And in the comments below, in the description box below, I'm going to link you to 3 web pages on my blog that are on how to make and use green powder, how to make and use vegetable powder, and then all the uses for fruit powders that you have. So powders are awesome. And to use a powder, it's a basic equivalent of 1 cup of fresh is about 1 tablespoon of powder. It doesn't quite work out that way a lot with powders, the way it does with if you're going from fresh to dried, because the fiber is going to make the difference there. You'll have some things that are that by the time you take all the water out, there's very little left. And so the powder is just basically the fiber and the nutrients that are left in that fiber. And some things have enough bulk in them that when you powder them, they are still kind of bulky as a powder. But you can get about a 1 cup to 1 tablespoon ratio and have about the right amount. The one thing I want to caution you on, though, is that just like with regular dehydrating, powders are the same caloric intake as the fresh. So if you're diabetic and watching your sugars, this is full of carbs. Okay, it's going to be the same amount of carbs in a tablespoon of raspberry powder as if you were eating a cup of raspberries. So you can't just use this to replace sugar and think that you're not getting those carbs, because you are. It's all the same. So let's talk a little bit about the equipment that you can use. You can use a mortar and pestle, which is the bowl that has the handle that you sit and grind the things that are in it. I don't use it because that to me is for only small amounts of things. I had one for a while and got rid of it because I never used it. You can use a large blender, whether you're using a lower end model or you've got a Blendtec or a Vitamix, any of them will work. The better machines, the more powerful machines will do a better job. But you can use anything. The one thing I don't recommend is a food processor, because the food processor's physics, the way it's made, kind of pushes food out as it's swirling things. But for a blender, it pushes things into the blade instead of out from it. So it tends to not work as well. So either we have a coffee grinder or a bullet blender. I find that about 80% of the time I'm using my bullet blender more than anything anymore. A coffee grinder works great, and it's great for small amounts. A bullet blender is a little more powerful, and I can do more in it at one time. Okay, whatever you happen to have, you don't have to spend money. You can actually get coffee grinders for about $5 at thrift stores now. Most coffee grinders that people use run about $20 if you buy them new, $15 to $20. This one was $20, I think it was $29. And what I love the most about these is that it has a removable cup. That's what I go for more, because this is so much easier to clean. All right, so I'm going to show you how this works. Walk you through just powdering some of my dehydrated mixed vegetables, which is what I keep to do the bulk of my vegetable powder. So I'm going to use my bullet blender. And I'm only going to fill this about halfway, because I want to make sure that I give it plenty of room to move. So here we go. And I'm going to fast forward this and reduce the volume so that you don't have to hear it. It's kind of loud. Now, here's what you have, okay? It does need one more grind. I would sift this a little bit and take out that last little bit of, you can see at the very top, there's still some larger pieces. So it needs just a little bit more grinding. But this way you can see what the quickest way to get a powder is. So what I will do is, I will store this in an airtight container, just like it is. I want to make sure that the container that I have it in is about the same volume as the amount of powder that I have, so that you don't have all this extra air and moisture that's getting into it. If I do a fruit powder like this, I will usually put a moisture absorber into the fruit powder, because it will help stop some of the moisture issues of any of the residual air that is in that the sugars from the fruit will just suck up like crazy. So that moisture absorber will help stop some of the clumping. And I will also leave a link down below that gives you some tips on how to stop clumping in your powders, because that's pretty important. But there you go. Now, most powders like this will last about 6 to 9 months if you do this and store it on the shelf. But I recommend that you only powder as much as you need for a month or two, and then powder again on demand after that. Keep it whole as long as possible, because you've exposed more of the fruits and the vegetables and the greens. When you've broken them down this far, you expose more of the surface to light, air, and moisture, which makes them degrade faster. So keep it whole as long as possible and grind on demand. Two more things about powders that that I wanted to talk about, because I get questions asked about it and I neglected to say it during that video, is that instead of going right into your jar to store, what you need to do first is dry your powder. Because what can happen when you're grinding, the heat from the grinding can actually cause the sugars to get all big and excited and agitated and start sticking together and going, oh, we like to be together, which you'll see clumping, which you saw actually when you could look in the jar, you could see a clump of the powder together. And you're exposing everything to a little bit more moisture, and you want to just make sure that before you put anything into a jar, you're fully dry. So what I do is I go from that step to I preheat my oven to 200. I lay all this out on a cookie sheet, turn my oven off, put my cookie sheet into the oven and let it sit there for about 20 minutes to half an hour, just depending on how long I'm, what I'm doing. And then I will allow it to be fully cooled before I put it in my jars. Then if I've got something like fruit powder, I add a moisture absorber into those that tend to be more prone to sticking. Then the last thing is never open your powders above your cooktop while you're cooking, because all of the steam that's coming from your saucepans and from the heat, if you open, onion powder will be the one that you'll know the most. If you take your onion powder and you're shaking it over a dish and you get that cakey onion stuff on the top, that's because the moisture that's coming up from your cooking things make the onion stick to your jar. And that's what you want to stay away from as much as possible to extend the life of your powders. So open your jar and measure it out away from your heat source, then put it in. And that way it will help your powders last a little bit longer in their jars. So I hope this was helpful for you. I hope you're excited about the idea of using powders. There is no ratio for powders to the meals that you're going to cook. It's one of those things that you're just going to have to start using on your own and figuring out what you want. I start with a tablespoon and then start working my way up when I'm introducing it to something new, so that I kind of know when that point is that it starts to taste like the vegetable. Green powders will turn things green. Our eggs are always green. But there's a point in green eggs when you start tasting green instead of egg. And that's when you know you've kind of gone too far and you just back it up the next time. But it's always an issue of learning how to play with it and figuring out what you like. And that's the cool thing about doing this. You can experiment so much. So I hope that was helpful. I have enjoyed doing this series with you. I've refreshed myself about the way that I dehydrate, and it's been a pleasure being with you all month long. But remember, we have the book available here in the store for $3 until January 1st. That is all the basics of what we've done all month long that you can have on your tablet, or you can print out to have handy in your notebook. And then tomorrow night's live at 5 p.m. Central U.S. time. We will be here live, and that video will be available for replay later. I mean, it will always be on the channel, but it'll be fun to have you here live to talk to you while we're doing it. So thanks again for being here. If you've missed yesterday's video, it is going to be right here. The entire series is going to be here for you to catch up on, or if you come in late and you're just now starting, watch the whole series. It will teach you all about the basics of dehydrating. And the subscribe button's right here if you love the channel. And I hope to see you again next time.